Hey there, friends. Dave Paulides, CanAm Missing Project, a copyrighted edition for our video channel. I'm giving Huck here because she's been such a good girl today. Oh, thank you. Thank you. She's been a very good girl today. Yeah. And I gave her some liver treats. Some organic, wholesome liver treats. We don't give her any bad stuff. And the vet said that these are really good for her. And she's been playing hard and taking care of the house for us and just been a super good girl. Yeah. So, thanks for being here. Gonna let her out. Okay, be a good girl. And this is a missing person segment, and I appreciate you being here. And it's turned very cold here in Montana. This morning I woke up, took Huck outside, and it was 29 degrees. Yes, that was a sobering experience, getting out of bed that cold this early in the season. But as you know, I like going to Hungry Horse Reservoir, and several of the mountains right around that area had their first snow within the last week. And parts of Glacier National Park have actually closed for the season, which is pretty normal. It's a little early, but not that bad. Talking to locals around here, a lot of people think that it's going to be a very cold winter, but not a lot of snow winter. Since I've been up here, I've been listening to locals, and sometimes they're not 100% correct. But if there's Montanans out there listening, I'd like to hear what you think this winter is going to be like. So, today, today was a good day, and I won't go into a lot of details, but I've got a lot on my plate right now. We got the conference, and I feel responsible for everything that goes on at a conference, especially when I'm one of the hosts. Myself and Joe Hauser from the Vortex are hosting it. I'm excited about it. And if you didn't get to be here, I'm sorry, but it should be a really good time. I am going to be at CryptidCon in Lexington, Kentucky. I think it's the third week in November. Myself, Dr. Meldrum's supposed to be there, but I haven't heard if he's going to be able to make it. I hope he does. And Cliff Barackman from Finding Bigfoot is going to be there. Cliff's a really, really nice human being. We don't agree on anything, except that we're very polite to each other. And I'm grateful that he's my friend, because he is a nice guy. But, again, the people at this conference now are people I've spent a lot of time with and getting to know. A lot of people ask me, they say, well, Dave, how do you decide what books you're going to read? And well, the people I have a lot of faith in, that I've watched their presentations and I just know they're telling the truth, I go to those people a lot and say, hey, what's the book that's on your desk right now? And depending if I've read it or not, if I haven't read it, I usually get it and read it. And that's how I get to the point to do a lot of my reading. A lot of people send me things all the time. I'm very grateful for that. It's quite a task when people send you a lot of things. And you gotta have a lot of gratitude, number one. And I do. So thank you. Let's get into the missing persons cases this week. I've got two for you today. One of them is a fairly current case, And one of them is a case that is almost exactly 100 years old. And we're going to start with that case in an area I know very well. When I was growing up, my parents had a small cabin with another family on the west side of Lake Tahoe. And we spent many weekends there, sometimes with that other family and without, but the other family was part of my dad's business. And we went into the Desolation Valley wilderness area a lot, fishing, hiking, and we usually took up Highway 50 from Sacramento up into the Lake Tahoe Basin. And the place we're going to talk about on this incident is right off of Highway 50. It's in a small, just out of a small town called Kybers. Kybers has an elevation of about 4,100 feet. Up in Lake Tahoe, elevation 6,200 feet. So, the incident involves a missing hunter named Alex Smith. He was 60 years old on September 17th, 1923. He resided in a city called Galt, G-A-L-T, a small city just south of Sacramento in the San Joaquin Valley. He was hunting with his son-in-law, a man named V.B. Skiff. They drove up to Kybers, and then they took a small dirt road about 15 miles southeast, and they were going to go deer hunting. Now, Alex had been to this location many times and had successful hunts. Well, they arrived there on September 16th, sat around, talked, set up their hunting camp, and went to sleep. Now, where is this? Well, this is Highway 50. And this is Kybers right here. Now, you notice there's nothing around here. This is wide open woods. But the first town after Kybers is Strawberry, Twin Bridges, and then you go up to Echo Lake and Myers. Myers is in the Lake Tahoe Basin right here. Going from Echo Lake down to Myers is steep downhill grade. Echo Lake, an absolutely gorgeous location. I'd encourage anybody to get there, and it's fun to take a hike around the backside of the lake. It's beautiful, beautiful. Yeah, there's a lot of people that take this road every weekend, get into the lake to go skiing in the winter up to Lake Tahoe, and just hiking and enjoying the summer in the summer months. But Kybers, 4,100 feet, can get a lot of snow. Whoops, I'm sorry. I'd like to blame Huck for that, but can't. Anyhow, so they go to sleep. Next morning they wake up and they talk about what they're going to do. Since it's their first night there, it's kind of a scouting expedition and it's a deer hunting. So each of them had a rifle, and they decide that they're going to split up that day, go in separate areas, and come back later that afternoon, compare notes. Now, before I go any further, how many times has this exact scenario played out? I know, I say it all the time, but it does. And it's almost as though something is watching. They split up. Well, Smith didn't return to the camp. And that was early in the morning, about 7:30, 8 o'clock. Now, Skiff was Smith's stepson. And Skiff said when Smith didn't return in the afternoon, he took off and he started to hike around looking for Smith. Called for him, yelled for him. Didn't see any deer. And he was several miles from camp. And he came across two other hunters walking on an old dirt logging road. He described Smith to him and said, "Hey, have you seen this man?" And they said, "Very early in the morning, we saw him," and pointed to a location not far from where they were. And he goes, "We haven't seen him since, and we haven't heard any shots fired or anything." Okay. So Skiff continued to look around, searched around, calling his name, went in the area that these other hunters pointed to. Didn't get any response. Didn't see anyone else. He returned after dark pretty late at night and decided that he was going to go to sleep, wake up the next morning, and go out and get a ranger. And that's exactly what happened. Skiff reported the disappearance of Alex Smith to the U.S. Forest Service. He explained the situation, explained what happened, the timeline, and the 2 Forest Service personnel that were on the scene went out with him, did a cursory search of the area, went to the region where the hunter said he was, walked around. Afternoon, they get back to the original hunting camp, and one of the rangers decides to leave to get more help, while the other ranger stays with Skiff and they discuss the possibilities. And the ranger does a debriefing with Skiff about Smith. Was he in good health? How competent was he? Was he a rookie hunter? Truth was, Smith was a super experienced hunter, super successful hunter, had hunted this area many times in the past. And it was shocking to Skiff that Smith wasn't back. He couldn't reconcile it in his mind. Well, on the 19th of September, the El Dorado County Sheriff, which jurisdiction this was in, and El Dorado County goes all the way from the bottom of the hill off Highway 50 all the way up to Lake Tahoe in the Nevada line. Big county. And they got other rangers, hunters, locals. They brought up some horses, foot searchers. In total, they got about 25 people up into that camp, and they broke them into groups. They had some old maps, and they said, okay, you got this area, you got this area, you got this area. Let's go out. We'll come back in 6 hours. Well, they came back, didn't find anything, didn't see anyone, didn't hear any shots. But before camp that day, they did fire off 3 shots. Nothing in return. Now, if you're a hunter, it's getting to be hunting season. Well, why'd they fire off 3 shots, Dave? Because that's a universal signal that there's trouble. If you're a hunter, let's say you break your leg, you fire off 3 shots, fairly rapid succession. Wait 45 minutes, fire off 3 more. This is why, if you're a hunter, you never, ever go into the woods unless you got about 20, 30 rounds of ammo. Because you're going to need it if you get hurt. You're going to fire off rounds, and that's going to let people know someone needs assistance. Well, they never got a response to their rounds. Now, the searchers stayed on site and consistent for 3 days. That's a monumental task because people have to eat. It's super tiring hiking around the mountains nonstop. Oftentimes, if you're a hunter, you'll hike for half an hour and just sit for another half an hour and listen and watch. If you're a searcher, you got to keep moving because you got to keep looking. It's exhausting. Well, the U.S. Forest Service announced on September 22nd that the search and rescue that had terminated the day before was going to get re-implemented by the family of Alex Smith. They got 15 employees from the Seago Milk Company in Galt to drive up, and they were friends of Mr. Smith's, who he worked with. And Robert Reed was the head of the milk plant who organized the transportation in the group to come up. Everyone loved Alex. And they got family members from throughout California to start arriving. Now, Mrs. Smith also came up, and she was interviewed. She stated that her husband was one of the most experienced hunters she had ever met, and in her mind did not believe that he was lost. She said that he had hunted this area too many times, was an experienced outdoorsman, and the only thing she could imagine is if he got hurt or he was somehow sick. But she said that he wouldn't have been outside the area of the search zone either because he knew that area to be productive. It's kind of a perplexing statement, because nobody else had seen many deer, which is weird, because he had been in this area 10, 20 years. Well, searches went on for a couple days. Family, friends, co-workers, they stayed on the mountain searching. Well, Sheriff Rowland from the El Dorado County Sheriff made a special plea to all hunters on the 26th to pay special attention to unusual circumstances on the mountain. He said, if you find some clothing, find boots, find a fresh fire that looks out of place, make sure you report it, because there was an active search and rescue going on. Well, people get tired again. Well, there was a backup plan. On October 31st, Alex's Galt Gun Club had organized a special body recovery search. They didn't call it body recovery. They called it a search to find Alex. All the rest of the search and rescue efforts were over. Total effort about 10, 12 days. Nobody found anything. But everybody loved Alex at the gun club, and hunting season had ended, so the hunters were in good shape and they're ready to go back out and find out where Alex was at. So what they said was that they would go to the site and that Skiff would show them where he was last seen. And they got 50 people from the gun club that were mountaineers. And November 4th, they went up there, spent the night, and then very early in the morning on November 5th, they met with Forest Service personnel, and the Forest Service people showed them the maps where the other searchers had been to. And they went into areas that other people had not, and they expanded the area a bit. Everyone stayed together in pairs. They didn't want anyone to get lost. Again, they came back very late that night. They got nothing. Very frustrating. Mrs. Smith couldn't believe it. She knew her husband was probably the most competent outdoorsman she'd ever met, and she grew up with outdoorsmen. She knew her husband had carried a rifle, which would have signaled others where he was at. He knew that if he was lost, to fire off the 3 rounds. He knew if he was lost, to go to high ground and look. But none of that happened. And it was just kind of all swept away and forgot for many years. October 19th, 1953, years later, a human skull and upper jaw with 9 teeth remaining were found in the area near China Flat, which is more than 5 miles from the last point that Smith was seen. They described it as the area of Shanty Ridge. A hunter had found it and knew something was wrong, got a hold of the El Dorado County deputies, and the deputies hiked in with him and recovered the jaw and the skull. Well, this was prior to any DNA, but the sheriff, this was hard to believe. 30 years later, they still had reports. That's really hard to believe, that this skull was found. I mean, I didn't even believe it when I read it. So I got the article right here for you. October 19th, 1953, Sacramento Bee, Placerville. Human skull and upper jaw with 9 remaining teeth may be the key to the whereabouts of Alex Smith, 60 of Galt. He's been missing. And he had been missing since September 17th, 1950. September 15th, 1950. So they'd been missing for about 3 years. So the skull was about 3 years old. Again, this was before DNA technology. Now there was some blood technology out there, but there was nothing about DNA. Now they also knew to check dental records, but with only 9 teeth and limited dental work, they didn't quite know what to do. So everything was inconclusive. Not sure whatever happened to the jaw, but that was the end of it. Alex Smith was never found. No other remains were found when the deputies went out and looked at the skull. There was no rifle. There was no clothing. They would usually find boots or leather. None of that was found. So, whatever happened to the man or the individual with the skull probably had post-death animal predation. That's the best guess. It's amazing. California is littered. The mountains are littered with missing people. And the more I do this, the more it shocks me. People always make fun of me and say, oh, Dave, there's, so many millions and millions of people in California. They're not getting lost. Until you go up to the Sierra Nevada mountains and you start walking around, folks, it can get very remote very quick. Watch Missing 411 The Hunted, where we went into the woods on horseback 8 miles. There you go. All right, the next story, much more current. September 1st, 2006. And before I get into this one thing about the profile points that I am adamant about, and that is intellect. There's way, way too many people that have been super, super smart that have disappeared under very unusual circumstances that really no rational investigative process could figure out. This is one. A man named Piotr Drabeck, born and raised in Poland. He went missing September 1st, 2006. He was a resident of Edmonton, Alberta, Canada. He had 2 PhDs and 3 master's degrees. He was described as absolutely brilliant. Now, most of the time people associate brilliance with lack of common sense, no athletic ability, and that would not be the case with Peter. Peter had several black belts in Taekwondo. His educational specialties were nanotechnology, physiology, molecular biology, chemistry. And articles described him as a champion athlete and ultra outdoorsman. At the time of the disappearance, he was working at the National Institute for Nanotechnology at the University of Alberta. He was divorced and had 1 daughter. Peter had one super good friend in Edmonton, told him everything. And he had been planning a trip to Hawaii for months and months and months. And he told his friend that he was leaving on the 1st and be back about 10 days. And he was going to go scuba diving, want to take some hikes in the jungles, do that kind of thing. So on September 1st, he got on a plane that flew from Edmonton to Salt Lake City. And then there was some conjecture saying that he didn't fly from Salt Lake City to Kauai. We actually flew from Salt Lake City to Oahu and then on to Kauai. In Oahu, he made a $44.80 credit card charge to Aloha Airlines. And that got him to Kauai. And that was the last time his credit card was ever used. They confirmed that he was on the flight. So he got into Kauai. Now the investigation into this, just to get to the point I just told you, took months. Months. Because Peter didn't return from Hawaii on a scheduled date. And people had to backtrack, contact Salt Lake City, contact Hawaii police, and just start trying to figure out this complicated web of what happened. Well, again, he was supposed to be back into Edmonton on 9/11. Yeah, weird, isn't that? He was on a 10-day holiday that included scuba diving, rock climbing, jungle trek, and more. Now, right away, his friend knew he was going to go scuba diving and knew the company's name. So they got a hold of the company. He's supposed to be on that trip, on that excursion, the last day of his trip. He never was there. So he never did that. And Delta Airlines confirmed that he wasn't on the return flight back to Edmonton. So they got all this going, and they figured out that he last known spot was Kauai. And Peter's dad was a man named Joseph Drabeck. Joseph. This is Peter. Joseph absolutely loved Peter. He sounded like the way I love Ben, honestly. Killed me to read this. It just tore my heart up. Joseph again raised Peter in Poland. And in Joseph's words, Peter was an ultra-experienced world traveler. He'd gone to many, many countries, hiked the world as an outdoorsman, and the thing he really loved to do was to trek through the world's remote spots. When Joseph got to Kauai, he set up and got a Polish translator. And on his first day there, the news got a hold of him and interviewed him and asked the translator how Joseph is holding up. The translator said he's completely broken as a man. He cries a lot. He's depressed over the fate of his son because nobody knows where he's at. He just literally fell off the face of the earth when he landed in Kauai. Well, Peter was a visiting scholar from the University of Alberta in the nanotechnology department. His best friend in Alberta said that Peter didn't tell anyone else about this trip. He didn't tell his ex-wife. He didn't tell the school. And when the school asked where he was or why he was going to be there, he said he had a bad illness and was going to be there for a week and a half. The only purchase made by Peter that was confirmed was the ticket to Kauai, which they confirmed he was on. Well, Joseph trekked around Kauai for 2 weeks. He went to hospitals, talked to firefighters about possible accidents they may have responded to, put his poster up at hotels, spoke to the police at their briefings. Nothing. Now, in some ways, people weren't ultra shocked by this because they knew that if Peter was going to land in Kauai, there was a possibility he was going to go to the jungle and hike. But he never talked to anybody once he got to Kauai that they could figure out. Now, when he was at the University of Alberta, he was working on a nanotechnology project, which was his expertise. Now, what is nanotechnology, Dave? Well, it's the study and the manipulation of individual atoms and molecules. Now, I'm not the sharpest knife in the drawer, so I had to look and see, well, what are the applications of this? Well, it can be used in medicine, energy research, engineering superstructures, consumer products, flight avionics. That one intrigued me. Flight avionics. Right away, I start thinking about UFOs, UAPs. I don't know. But Joseph, the father, ended up not finding anything. And to this day, Peter's disappearance is one of the most insanely complete disappearances I've ever read about. It's like literally he fell off the face of the earth. And it's been 17 years. Nobody's heard from him. This reminds me of so many cases where somebody goes to a location and just vanishes. And that person has so much to add to the world. They're gone. After a while, I do start to think that, are these people getting taken for their brilliance, and maybe they're needed in another world or another dimension? I have no idea. But it's bizarre. Piotr Drabik, Kauai, Hawaii, September 1st, 2006. The other case, Alex Smith, 60 years old, missing September 17th, 1950. So, I appreciate you being here. Now, when I talk to you guys, I'm not talking to you guys like I'm lecturing you. I'm talking to you like, there's a lot of smart people out there. I know, because I read your comments. And I appreciate them. And the reason I read them is I can become a lot smarter by talking to thousands of people than just talking to myself every day. So, you are appreciated. And one of these days, we're going to figure all this out. And as I'll keep saying, I really want people to watch Missing 411, The UFO Connection. I do think that there are things about that movie that resonate with me daily. You can watch it on Amazon. And you can watch my other two movies, Missing 411 and Missing 411, The Hunted, on Amazon. And if you want to get DVDs to my movies, hats, movie posters, you can get them at my store, NA, like North America, NABigfootsearch.com. So, be nice to your family. Have gratitude. Have gratitude. And when you go out in the world, do something good for somebody else. It'll resonate in your heart. Paulides out.